Hi, and welcome to the Thriving Entrepreneurs 15 Minutes.
He is David Foster.
And she is Rochelle Learling. Today's topic is, how does an entrepreneur deal with always being on?
A big one, right? To cover.
It is.
And we only got 15 minutes today. So this is a big challenge for both of us.
14 something right now.
14 something. Okay. Let's start off because, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was wondering, and I think many people are, what is being turned on anyway? Like, what is that when we're talking about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question to start with, because I think always being on is being somewhat in fight or flight or some kind of sympathetic tone, which is really actually quite addictive. How do you see it?
It is very addictive. And in preparation to this talk, I was also thinking that it is easy to be on and to stay on because it's harder to turn off because that addiction is so tempting. You are important when you think of work. You are important when you're busy doing work. And being busy is something that we all applaud in this here and now society. So I do think that indeed it is addictive.
Not only that, but fight or flight basically keeps us alive, out of danger.
Yeah.
But it reduces our cognitive performance and it reduces our emotional capacity. So if we're always on at work, we have less ability to make good decisions and we have less capacity to basically deal with the ebbs and flows of what's going on.
Yep. Because we don't have the mind space. We don't have the room to actually be here in the here and now, to have that presence. And it's also such an overused term. But when I think of that, it comes down to not just being here in the body, like literally having this body here and just thinking and talking, but actually feeling that I'm here and experiencing this moment. And I think that when you're turned on, when you shouldn't be, this is what happens. You're disconnected from the world right in here. And thus, there is no connection with what's going on.
Right. Yeah, awareness is a huge, huge thing because as humans, all we do is adapt, to conditions and stimulus. And so if you're always on at work, you're adapting to that over time. And, I think one of the things that we always want to talk about is, well, how do we think about always being on and what that has to do with how we perform at work? And so if you're a founder, an entrepreneur, or really anyone, you will work better if you take frequent breaks in your workday.
But it's easily said. And somehow somebody always has that feeling that, where do I find the time? Like I'm rushing to back and forth meetings, back-to-back meetings. There is no lunch break. Where do I find the time? But I think it is a matter of choice and really seeing from more of an analytical point of view, what is it costing you to be always on and to not have those breaks? And
another question I think you want to ask is, what's standing in the way from taking breaks? If you're a founder or an entrepreneur, do you have a wish to drive yourself into the ground and reduce your ability to make good decisions and risk your health? Is that your goal? Is that why you want to work that much? If you want to make better decisions, if you want to live a happy life, you literally have to make the time.
Yeah. And I think it's a commitment that you make, not only to yourself, but also to the business that you run. Because in the end, I think we both agree that it comes down to how you lead yourself. And if you're really investing in leading yourself, then you'll be able to manage the business better. So if you're constantly sabotaging yourself by not giving yourself the breaks that you need, not committing to that investment in yourself, then in the end, the business suffers. So it goes for so many things. It's just, why is it so hard to grasp that this is so important that you cannot not turn off?
Yes. And I would judo that question just slightly into, what is it that you're getting out of not taking a break? what is driving you to behave in such a way that at least logically we can tell is not healthy, not productive, not profitable? That's a great question to ask yourself in a very curious way,
Mm-hmm.
in a very open way, and just see what comes out from that kind of inquiry.
Yeah, I super agree. And I also think that, coming back to what I said earlier, it is super important to really sit down and analyze, what is it costing you, not only the business, and going further and going harder is always fun, but it's costing you something in the long run. And when I think of conversations I have, a lot of it's costing relationships. It's a lot
Yes.
of pain in the private area. And I think this has lots to do with the weekend setup. What do you do in the weekend that really actively disengages you from work in order
Right.
to be present, but also in order to come back on Monday and really give your all? So it's really that commitment that you also make on the days off to make sure that you are turned off. That makes sense.
Yes. Yes. And if we're talking about what we're doing,
Mm.
I can't let that go without saying switching from Excel to Facebook is not a break.
No.
It is not a break. It is actually going in the wrong direction, because you're taking something that is stressful in a work way and then giving yourself almost this addictive, unlimited amount of input in the same physical position, in the same screen. And we know that, social media and that kind of thing increases the depression, suicidality. So moving away from your workspace at regular intervals is the best way to make better decisions, to have a more fulfilling life. And when it comes to the weekend, if you're driving yourself into the ground 5 days a week and you're just barely making it to Friday, and then the weekend is somehow your recovery, where you're not really engaging in the things around you that are meaningful, that's not balance. That's closer to survival. And I think you really have to ask yourself, how can I structure this differently?
Yeah. Well said. And it's closer to survival. I think that's something people really need to hear. That basically you're trying to survive to be back on Monday and have some headspace left, which really isn't a way to go. And that's really going to the point of addictive behavior again.
Right.
I think it's also important to see what the weekend looks like, because I think we all have this idea of what we could do on weekends, like sleep in, for instance. But I think it's super important that when you disengage from work, that you're actively disengaging, aka kind of distracting yourself from work. I mean, when things are stressful at work, I understand it's hard to let it go on Saturday morning, but there needs to be this ritual or way of getting out of your head that makes sure that you're actually here and now, rather than in your head while not really working, because then you're still on and working, right?
Just want to point out, we promised 15 minutes and we're past the halfway point.
I know.
Ritual. So a ritual during the day, your ritual on the weekend is actually a very good idea, but your ritual during the day is something that you can adapt to. And I want to point out, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Andrew Huberman. He's a professor of neurology and ophthalmology at Stanford. He's got this wonderful set of free podcasts and lectures where you can learn an awful lot about how we behave. I bring him up because one of his fundamental points in all of his lectures is that the ability to consciously and deliberately switch between work and rest is one of the best life skills you can have in terms of performance and happiness.
Yeah.
So if you think about your ritual, if you put that into your day, that you work, you rest, you work, you rest, and that becomes your pattern,
Yes.
you're going to feel better. And the question to ask there is, well, what's my ritual? What's my pattern? Where can I fit those things in?
Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, when it comes to rituals, we don't have to overcomplicate this. It's really not like a 3-hour long 10-step habit tracking thing. It's something that really gets you out there. And we're not going to give tips, because that's basically what we're trying to avoid here, really getting you to think about these things. But you should think about what that ritual could look like. It doesn't have to be hours long. Again, it should be something that really takes you out of the screens, out of the computer, out of your work mode, and gets you into who you are, like literally into the human body again.
Right. We have a comment here about just working 5 more minutes, and that it should work out for us, but then we struggle to recover.
Yes.
And you know, the question to ask yourself there is, what's the 5 more minutes for? Right? Is that 5 more minutes because you're in the middle of thoracic surgery and it's going to take 5 more minutes to sew him up so he doesn't bleed to death? Fair enough. Spend 5 more minutes, right?
Right.
Or sometimes it's a thought, like, I just need to finish these couple of sentences because I'm afraid I'm going to forget them. But if it's more than, if it's something that happens all the time, just 5 more minutes, I just have to finish this. You really have to ask your question. You really have to ask yourself, why? Why am I doing that? And, you know, the sub question, as Jack Black would say, is what happens if I don't? 4 more minutes left. 4 more minutes.
Well said. Thanks for the reminder. Plus, what are you afraid of, right? I think that adds to that second question. What are we afraid of if we don't finish that work that would cost us 5 more minutes? But as we already talked about, we're kind of tricking ourselves into addictive behavior. And then the deeper question is, why are you so attached to this work? Why is it so important to do 5 more minutes of work? And is it really 5 minutes that you actually time? Or is it just another way to keep going and just kind of motivate yourself? So not to withdraw this from the conversation we're having, but indeed ask yourself, what is the attachment I have to work and working more? And what is it I need to get out of that addictive behavior? And what is that disengagement activity to me or for me?
Especially when the 5 more minutes becomes 1 hour later. That's a brand new comment.
Yes.
And a good question. I mean, we talk about like how to think about what happens here. A good question to ask when you make that decision. So say you make your schedule and, you know, I'm going to follow the Pomodoro technique, or I'm going to follow, you know, whatever, or this is my break. And you find yourself tempted to violate that break. Ask yourself if it's fulfilling.
Love that.
Personally fulfilling. Now, we all have some version of a love-hate relationship with our jobs. And there's times where you have to sort of like take out the trash and you wish that you didn't have to do that. Aside from that, if you find yourself being sucked in, ask why and ask if it's fulfilling. And if it's not, maybe there's a part of you that can say, because I did what I needed to do today, and I'm not going to be fulfilled or better off by driving myself into the ground, maybe I can make a different choice.
So it's really building that awareness, flagging when the behavior comes up again with the 5 more minutes thought, and then asking, is this actually fulfilling or not?
Yes.
Last point I would say, for me at least, is that it has lots to do with self-worth. Are you worth it to yourself to take a break and to recharge in order to come back better? Are you worth that to yourself? And thus asking yourself, what is my self-worth like? Am I giving myself enough? Am I cutting myself enough slack here?
That is a heavy duty last thought. My last thought is going to be related to a comment we just got. That the rest is not productive. I realize that's a common belief. However, I go back to my old training days where my best coach would say to me, work hard or train hard and rest harder. Rest is a part of work. And it doesn't have to be rest like, you know, feet in the sand with a drink and, you know, not knowing what time it is. It can be building a stone wall, climbing a mountain, talking to your kids, whatever it is. So ask yourself, well, what are you getting out of not taking rest?
And think deeply. I think there's lots of questions here that we talked about, and many of them are deep. It goes beyond the 5 minutes Pomodoro thing. It's more than just getting a new coffee. It's really thinking deeper about how you show up and what behavior you're showing.
Yes. We are cutting ourselves off.
Yes,
because we promise 15 minutes. We also promise next week. We hope this is very valuable, and thanks for watching. We will answer the questions that we've gotten.
Yeah.
If you have more questions, drop them below.
Yep.
And Rochelle, next week we are talking about
something really cool as well. We're going to be talking about staying happy and fulfilled when business is tough. Also a very big one.
Yes, and related to what we're talking about here.
For sure.
So until next week.
Until
thank
next
you.
week. Thank you.